wrong?
Duh.
What is good and bad?
I always refer to myself as a contrarian.
The search for common sense and the defense of free speech.
Duh.
All right, welcome to the Duh podcast. We are here live. Actually, it's not live. I don't know why I said that. But we have myself in California, we have Tommy in New York, and we have our guest, Fahmo Mohammed from Kenya. Fahmo, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Now, Fahmo is a friend of mine from college. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of Oregon in journalism. She has a master's degree from Columbia University, also in journalism, and now is living in Kenya and Nairobi, working as a teacher and as a freelance journalist. Fahmo, I really wanted to get you on the show and get your background and perspective, especially because you were born in Kenya, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And then your family emigrated to the United States when you were pretty young. How old were you when you came over here?
I think I was just about 5.
5 years old? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about what that was like growing up as an immigrant and as a Muslim here in the United States.
I mean, now that I think about it, it's actually quite strange for, a young kid who's so used to, being around people that look like them, that talk like them, that have the same culture, religion, and then move to a place where you're the only Black person, or you're the only Muslim, or the only African in your class. So now that I'm thinking about it, it was a pretty big move, and it was something I had to get used to. I still wasn't used to it, and having the opportunity to realize that, being in a place where you're the only one wasn't necessarily a good thing, and helping me grow and fit in. Yeah, I think just realizing that it kind of makes me who the person I am today.
You were saying that trying to fit in. I think kind of a big topic going on right now, especially with the refugee crisis and immigration from the Middle East to Europe and to places like the United States, and we had like the Trump ban on the list of 7 or 9 countries from the Middle East, a lot of them predominantly Muslim. So what is this? What does the idea of assimilation mean to you in terms of immigration? And I remember I think when we spoke before, you said your parents were sort of hesitant about assimilating. So what is the balance, do you think, between staying true to your roots and your old culture, and then also adapting to a new environment when you move to a new country?
I think my parents, compared to other immigrant families, were quite different. My parents were very much pushed on us following our religion to the fullest that we could do, and unfortunately, that meant, for a little kid, that meant trying to understand that sometimes things weren't necessarily going to be the same. I wasn't going to have the same upbringing. And the reason I say that is because I grew up in America post 9/11. Unlike my siblings who were, over 10 years older than me. So post 9/11, they were adults. They kind of understood what was happening in the world. But being, 7, 8 years old, while right after 9/11 happened, and then trying to fit in with all the other kids, and realizing that growing up in this America is going to be much harder for me than it would my older sister, who was 18, 19 at the time, or my brothers who were over 20 at the time.
And why was it harder?
I think it was realizing that my religious community was being targeted, but also like my ethnic community was being targeted. So it's one thing, being an immigrant, right? And another being a Muslim. It's like a double whammy post 9/11. So realizing that, if I was a young girl and I wanted to make the decision to wear the hijab, which actually I my mom refused. My mom refused for me to wear the hijab because of 9/11, and she was really worried that I was going to be like bullied, um, and she was really worried about me going to school and growing up because my last name is Mohammed, and um, as a young girl, it's a lot more difficult than being a young boy because being a young African Muslim boy, sometimes people don't even physically recognize that you're Muslim, right? Maybe once they realize what your last name is, then they're like, oh, he's that Hussein kid or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for a woman, it's her physical appearance, usually her wearing her veil, that helps you realize that, oh, she's Muslim, or she follows this religious group, or etc. etc. Right? So kind of realizing that, and then seeing how people used to treat my mom and how they used to treat my older sisters, and just growing up in Oregon in general, a place where you don't find many Muslims or many immigrants, and then growing up in the whitest place ever. Like I grew up in a place called Clackamas, and then I moved to Happy Valley, and it's literal, and they're very narrow-minded, and fortunately don't like go past their block and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because on one hand you have the fact that you kind of recognize on an early stage that you were coming from a different culture, you have a different religion than most of the people around you, but then there's also the added factor of, was there like a conscious decision by your family to kind of keep you from fully becoming a part of the culture? Because I know you said that that you wanted to follow the religion to the fullest extent. Did that in any way prevent you from really knowing the people around you, or was there? I guess what I'm trying to say is, was there an artificial border that was put in between you and the people around you that you noticed was because of the culture you were coming from, or was it the culture you were coming into that was reluctant to accept you?
I would say that it's probably the culture that I was coming into that was reluctant to accept us. And that's partly because, people fear what they don't know, right? And in a place where, a global superpower like the US was attacked in their, territory for the first time, most people don't realize that, though 9/11 was, a terrorist attack, and though only, between 1,000, 2,000 civilians died at the time, it's quite, a small amount compared to how many people died in the war in Iraq, or, other terror events around the world, right? So people take such a small instance like that. And I'm not justifying that it was like okay or anything like that. No, definitely not. Like, it was a terrorist attack. It's sad. So many people died. And, my religion does not justify or condone killing innocent civilians ever, right? So it's just sad that people take something and then use it under the name of a religion, right? And then they're trying to justify their actions, and then people associate that with now a whole religion. So now you have, the majority of the Western world hating a large amount of, Muslims right now. Innocent people who, could be their own, American brothers and sisters, right? People who they've grown up with like their whole lives. And now out of nowhere, they have this justified hate towards, a religious and ethnic group of people. Like some people weren't even Muslim and they hated them, right? Because they looked Muslim, right? And just realizing that at a very young age that things were going to be hard, or things were going to be difficult for me. That was like a hard realization. And then also the fact that once I reached puberty and things like that, and I was growing up, my mom was very like, my parents, both my mom and my dad, were very nervous about my twin sister and I, like, growing up in that America. Though they wanted us to fit in, they didn't want us to completely assimilate, and lose our faith in our religion, And that was, I think, more difficult. But the fact that we learned it at an earlier age, it was a lot easier for us than it was, say, like my older sister or my older brother, moving here, at the end of their teenage years, and then learning society and things like that.
Yeah. I think I want to go back to what you mentioned. You said that 9/11 kind of gave a justified hate of a certain group, so that after Islamic terrorism really hit home in the United States, people started being able to look to that and using it as a way to justify their hatred of Muslims. Is that what you said, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the crux of the argument now, with a lot of the idea is that there's certain people that are, the buzzword is Islamophobia, like they're just afraid of Muslims because they fear what they don't know, like what you said. But then the other side of the argument would say that that the Quran offers a justification of a hatred of apostates or infidels, so people who have either left the religion or who are not Muslim, and then that has been sort of the source of this pattern of radical jihadism that we've seen in the past decade or so. So what I think a lot of people are confused by is they look at the text of the Quran, which is not all roses and daisies, and says that anyone who does not conform to the religion or praise Allah, that they are surely will face a tough punishment, and that anyone who battles in the name of Allah is fighting a justified war. And so when I look at the statistics, you look at the percentage of hijackers in 9/11, how many of them were Western educated, how many of them had bright futures in front of them and had other prospects, and yet they decided to blow themselves up. And then you ask yourself, well, at this point, it's not like destitute people who are just looking for something to find meaning in their lives. It seems to be people who could otherwise live a good life and decide to become a martyr in the name of a religion. My question for you is that, you and I go back and we're good friends, and we're friends because I think that we have shared values and things like that. But even, with any religion like Christianity or the Quran or, Judaism, where there's like an ultimate book, people don't take verses of the Bible like, eye for an eye. They don't take these things literally anymore because we've made scientific advancements and we make advancements in what it means to live a good life and what it means to be an ethical person, in spite of religion, not because of it. What would you say to that? Like that you take the most violent verse in the Quran you can find, and if you are a practicing Muslim, the idea is that it is still the word of Allah as transcribed by Muhammad. But it seems to me that moderate Muslims at this point can kind of shake it off because of more scientific approach to morality. What would you say about that?
Well, I think you you mentioned a lot, right? And I just want to start with this. A lot of what you mentioned about, people sort of text, right? Like, let's just start with the word jihad. Like, the Arabic meaning, right, behind what the word jihad means, it just means struggle, right? So when people, like, if people are using that word in context of religion, you can have, like, I can have a jihad with my studies. Like, you can have jihad with your health, right? Things like that, right? So what people do, right? And this is the most misconstrued term associating my religion with all this hatred and terror and war, right? What people are doing is they're taking, contexts of what my religion, of what the Quran says, right? And they're misconstruing it and using it in a way that is trying to associate my religion with, violence. And that's not necessarily the case. Islam and Muslim, like, the word refers to a submission to God, right? Submitting yourself to God. And whether you're Christian, whether you're a Jew, whether you're Muslim, you can take a context of your religious text and you can interpret it in your own form, and it can mean something different than what that that holy book is referring to in that exact and pure context, right? And I think that's what people are doing. When I read the Quran in Arabic, I'm reading it in its purest form. But as soon as it's transliterated into English, it does not mean the same thing it meant, or the exact same thing it meant, than
Right.
in its purest form in Arabic, right? And I think that because people take so many, minor things, right? Minor things from these religious texts. Yes, my religion says something about, about listening to God. It says something about, how it's against my religion for, people to be homosexual, right? It says something about all these different things. And yes, as a Muslim, I believe exactly what God has put in front of me in my religious text. Though it says nothing, right? It says nothing about torturing people who are going against your religion, right? Or and killing innocent people and things like that. It says a lot about what God is going to do, right?
Yeah.
When the day of judgment reaches and things like that. It says a lot about that, but it has not said it's as a Muslim your civil duty to go do God's job.
Well,
Right?
I wanna ask you about the word innocent. You said it doesn't justify going to kill innocent people. I mean, I've read almost all of the Quran. I'm almost done with it. If I could use one word to describe it, it would be repetitive. It says the same the same things pretty clearly over and over again. So, is a non-Muslim an innocent person, or in the eyes of Allah, would that be considered to be someone
Yes.
who is transgressing?
No, innocent. It's not my job, right? Me as a human being, whether I'm a Muslim or not, right? It's not my job to make any judgments of any person, whether or not they're Muslim or not, right? Like, we have to think of ourselves, and this is what my religion has taught me, right? We have to think of ourselves, right? As, you're my brother, whether you're a Muslim or not. If you're a Muslim, you're my Muslim brother, right? But God made us all, right? So if you are dying and I'm seeing you die, whether you're a Muslim or not, it's my duty to go help you.
Yeah.
So when people try and, try and justify, terror and things like that and killing innocent people, that's what it is. It doesn't matter if they're killing, someone who's a Muslim or not, someone who's gay or not, someone who goes against your value. It doesn't matter. They are still innocent in God's eyes, right?
Yeah. Tom, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, so that sounds like, that just sounds like being a good person in general. which I think we all strive to be. I guess what I'm still not understanding is like, what's the appeal to you about that religion? Like, what is it about it that makes you want to continue to pursue it, I guess?
I don't know. Like, I don't think there's any one answer to your question. I think that whenever I have questions, right, about anything, about life, struggle, and things like that, my religion has an answer to everything. There's not one case, right, where I can never find an answer through God, through the Quran, through my religion in any sort of way. And I think, to me, it's just the power in that submission to God. You know, in our religion, we believe that when you sujood, and sujood is the Arabic term for prostrating. So when you're prostrating, right, and you're praying, you're in your lowest form. You are closest to God in that form than you are at any other time, right? So it's just that power of, knowing that I'm in front of my, like my God. Well, we all have the same God, so there's only one God. But I'm in front of, I'm in front of God. I'm submitting myself to God, and I can ask God for anything, and whether or not He chooses to give it to me, the answer is always there in whatever, in whatever I'm asking or I need or I'm thinking. And I don't know if like I'm explaining the answer. It's just it's
Well,
it's a
let me try
complicated
it.
relationship, but
Let me try asking a different question because that sounds. I mean, it sounds a lot more like the power of believing in God and what that can do for individuals. But that, like, is it the believing in, is it the theocracy part that you like, or is it the community and the actual community family oriented culture that Muslims have?
I think one, obviously, it's like it's the power in my religion has kind of had the basis of what a society is supposed to be, right? So it not only began like as a religion, right? It, after the Prophet, peace be upon him, after he died, the basis of what a society, of a community is, that began, that the idea of government, theocracy, things like that, all of that stuff began, right? And like my ummah, my community now, and all the values that I have from, like my family, my culture, my religion, everything is kind of just in the basis of how my religion began and how it spread. And I think it's kind of just the power in that it doesn't matter who we are, where we're from, what ethnic background, where we come from, the fact that, we all believe in the same God, we all follow the same religion. It doesn't matter what language we speak, at the end of the day, we can still understand each other through, the language that we pray in and believe in and things like that. I think that power behind all of that is why
Fahmo, let me ask you this then. Do you think that society like Saudi Arabia that tries to live by the book, by the Quran, they try to live under Sharia, do you think that's closer to God, or that's closer to the ideal Muslim society than say United States, or like even take like Kenya or Egypt, which are a little less fundamentalist about it? Do you think that like the Saudi Arabian way of approaching it, like Wahhabism, like trying to live Sharia as the actual law of the land, is the way to go?
Well, actually, like the fact that you're stating Wahhabism and things like that, it's actually a clash of what our religion is and what their culture is, right? So these concepts, right? These concepts of Wahhabism and Maliki Islam and all these different sects of what people believe in Islam now, right? That isn't necessarily what our religion is. Our religion, me as a Muslim, I'm a Sunni Muslim. I follow exactly what the hadith and the sunnah, the stories and what has been written about the Prophet and how he followed his religion. That's what I believe, right? So this concept of what Wahhabism is and things like that, that's a clash of what our religion and what culture is. Wahhabism, they took this, the scholar now, in the early 1900s and even, like before that, there were these Islamic scholars that, were analyzing the way religion at the time in the Arabic world, right? They were analyzing the way their society viewed religion and things like that. So people said, no, like this is my personal view of what the religion is and what it should be. And that's where these beliefs arose from, right? So Wahhabism now arose from that. And so
that's interesting because it sounds like Wahhabism is the opposite of that. It sounds like the more moderate Muslims are following what you just described, and that Wahhabism is a return to the actual word of the Quran and the Hadith. Because if you were actually following the Hadith, like if you were following the law and the way that Muhammad went about creating Islam, I mean, he in the Hadith it talks about him waging war and trying to spread Islam, because when the Middle East saw the spread of Christianity in the early 400, 500, 600, the 6th, 7th, and 8th century, when kind of Islam sort of arose, like you mentioned how you cannot fully understand the Quran if you don't know Arabic, and what some people suspect is that was a way to try to influence and get people to convert to Islam and to learn Arabic to create a more powerful Middle Eastern and Arabic society that would be more influential than what they were starting to see Christianity pour into. And Christianity, of course, never actually got past, into the Middle East and got a foothold because of Islam. But Wahhabism, and the more fundamentalist way, seems to be the way that is less less interpretive, because if you look at the Hadith and you look at the Quran, I mean, those are really only your two only links to Allah, right? Because the belief, if you're a Muslim, is that you're linked to Allah and to the heavens and to knowing God is through the words. So if you start to interpret the words in a way that is different from how they were written, it lays out pretty clearly what Sharia is, and it lays out pretty clearly that, like for instance, I couldn't walk down the street as an atheist and openly live my life as an atheist, even in Egypt, which is considered to be a lot more moderate. I think maybe there's that's what is hard for me to understand. I think was hard for a lot of other people to understand, coming from a more secular background, where you say, yes, it's religion, it's everyone has the opportunity to interpret it in their own way. But for the people who are committing these acts of violence, and it doesn't even have to be violent. It can just be the fact that you don't think that an atheist deserves to live a regular life, or a Christian deserves to live a regular life in a society, and they can look to these books and say, see, this is it. I mean, if you try to take any other interpretation of it, you're going against the direct word of Allah and the direct word of Muhammad. And so, I mean, I could learn Arabic. It would take me a while, but I doubt it would say something much different than the translations that have been in English.
Well, I think, kind of what we were talking about, the concept of what the word behind jihad is. That's what a lot of people do, the concept and the word behind Sharia.
But it's not just the word jihad. It actually calls for, the Quran actually calls for war against anyone that's a non-Muslim, and that anyone non-Muslim is truly wicked and truly deserves punishment. So they're not just calling it jihad.
Not necessarily, because in that context, if we're going to use that in context, during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, in the context of what you mean, him using jihad, that was what he was using jihad in its purest form, when the religion was beginning. But the reason um, why God allowed him, right, to pursue different religious battles is because the Muslims at the time were basically being hunted and trying to be killed. They were kicked out of Mecca. They made their way to what is now Medina, and the religion began and was spreading and things like that. So all these battles that they were talking about, these religious battles and things like that, it's because they were trying to the Christians and other not necessarily Christians, sorry, the tribes in the Arabia in Mecca and in Saudi, right? They were trying to kill the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and trying to kill the Muslims at the time, right? So before, that's an example of kind of not necessarily crusades or anything like that, but that's fighting for life now. You know what I mean? That's fighting for survival in its pure form. But now people will take that concept right now of the word jihad and associate it in something that that isn't what that means in this context, and by using terror and using war and violence on innocent people, right?
Mhm.
And I think this concept of where Wahhabism is in Saudi and things like that is very contradictory because in Saudi now the royal family, for example, the women can go out without a hijab, without an abaya, and in Saudi, because they live in a theocratic society. Even if, like, say your younger sister, right, were to go to Saudi, she would have to cover her hair and she would have to wear an abaya because that is law, right? But for the royal family, they can go out, they can show their hair, they can wear jeans, they can wear whatever they want, they can go, they can drink, do all of these things. The Wahhabi police wouldn't say anything about it. But now, if I were personally to do all of those things, I'd be arrested.
Right.
Right? Very contradictory.
Right.
But now, when you grow up in a society where there's so many contradictions in what you personally think the religion is and your culture clashing with what the religion is, right? And you don't know any better, you'll grow up believing what you're doing is okay, right? And it's the same now, and this is kind of what I fear of what young kids growing up in Trump's America will now start thinking and believing, right? People are kind of forcing their own beliefs on young kids, and kids see what the media shows them and the society that they're growing up in, right, where they are now like learning that it's okay to outwardly hate people and things like that. And if you grow up like that, you're going to grow up thinking that's okay.
Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity to kind of pivot and say, because we're kind of talking about how this is sort of a let me start over. I think it's a good point to kind of ask then, because now we saw the Women's March, in early January. That was kind of a march against that idea of Donald Trump being this kind of open, in the protesters' minds, he's kind of this open hate mongerer. And then we also saw, I don't know if it was Shepherd Ferry, I can't remember, but the sort of the symbol of the Women's March became that photo that was reminiscent of the Obama Hope photo, the one with the woman in the hijab.
Yeah. So
I'm curious. You wear a hijab. Do you still wear it every day?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's kind of interesting because it's sort of become this, especially with the Women's March, this symbol of feminism.
Feminism and
right. So what is
which
the
is ironic.
It's ironic. Interesting. Yeah. What's your take, and what does the hijab mean to you?
I think it's just kind of funny because the first thing people will say about Muslims, and especially Muslim women, is that we're oppressed, right? And that's because people are forcing us to dress a certain way. Our men are forcing us to wear hijab, to wear an abaya, all these things, right? And now this, the concept of, kind of like the power behind our religion and veiling ourselves, all of that is now being used as an example of feminism, which I think is just very ironic. I'm not going to hate on it because obviously I think it's a good thing, like people are hopefully educating themselves and being more open to the fact that, this is personal choice, though our religion does require it. It's, your religion can require something and you can choose not to do it. A lot of people.
So is that why you wear one then, or do you have a deeper meaning?
I think, one, yes, I wear it because my religion requires it. But two, I wear it because I choose. Like, I personally want to wear it. I think it's the deeper meaning behind it is the fact that, when I veil myself, right, to society, to people, you guys see me for what, I am. I'm covering myself, right? It's kind of there's kind of a beauty behind it. It's the fact that, not everyone can see me in my purest form, right? Except for my husband, my father, my brothers, and like my grandfather, like people who I either can't marry, right? Or my husband. But even in front of them, I still have to be decent, except say like my husband or something like that. I still have to be decent, right? So though I'm I'm showing my hair in front of my brothers, it's not like I can go walk around like in shorts and a tank top in front of my brothers. I still have to be modest and respect them, things like that. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What would you say to people that say it's a form of oppression that even some people who wear it aren't aware of? Like, I mean, in some cultures, it's not an option. Like in Iran, it's not an option. It's in Saudi Arabia, it's not an option. In places in Indonesia where Islam is growing, it's not a choice. Like you just can't do it, or else you can get lashings, or you can get sent to jail, or things like that. Is it possible, or what do you say to people that say that it's a form of oppression?
Well, I think that in the way society is,
I mean, even if sorry before I cut you, even in the United States, if you're wearing one and there's no consequence for taking it off, that it's even in that context, it's still an deeply ingrained form of oppression.
Well, I think to counter that, I would argue that why is it an oppression? Though I disagree that people should never be forced to do something. Our religion is kind of very adamant on what it requires us, as Muslims to do, because the term behind Muslim is submitting yourself to God's will. So if you're following that to its purest form, then it should be pretty easy to wear your hijab and things like that. However, societies where they're forcing people and things like that, it's kind of going against what our religion says, and the fact that though my religion asks me to do something, I'm choosing to do it, right? But this concept of oppression and how wearing a veil or just being modest, right, is oppressing myself. Societal standards of what they expect women to be nowadays is a form of an expression of oppression, because women in the West, they expect you to be basically naked in my terms, right? We live in a sexual society where where we view like women is kind of degraded to my standard of what I think a woman should be, right? The less clothes we're wearing, the more appropriate we are. How is that not oppressing women compared to a woman choosing to cover herself, right?
So you said okay. So you said a few things though in there that I want to clarify, because you said your religion requires it, but it's also your choice. And then you said something about how that's the way God intended it to be. So I guess I'm just confused. Is it that you choose to do it because you believe God thinks women should wear hijabs?
Yeah. So I just mean that as a Muslim, I'm submitting myself to God's will, right? So if God says that as a woman you have to be modest and veil yourself, then I choose. But in that context, I'm choosing to veil myself because one, I'm submitting myself to God, and two, God has asked me. But I also mean it in the context of religion nowadays can religions, whether it's Islam, Christianity, or whatever, right? In those religious texts, God can ask you to do something and people can choose not to do it. So that's what I mean what specifically talking about choosing to wear my veil, because there are people who, like there are other Muslims, right? People who call themselves Muslim, right, who don't wear veils. Like I personally have friends who don't wear veils, but they know the Quran says it's required to wear a veil, right? But they personally choose not to do it. That's what I mean by saying that I'm choosing to wear a veil.
Okay, but I guess what I'm not understanding is like why in your religion does God's will say women should be covered up? Like what's the point of that? Why would your God want that of the women in your religion?
Well, it's actually not just women. A lot of the time people just say women themselves because physically they see women like veiling themselves, but a part of our religious text also mentions men having to like wear a form of a hijab as well. Like men can't wear shorts below their like knee thigh area or things like that. They can't like wear like those, what are they called, like kind of like tank top things.
Like just a sleeveless t-shirt.
Yes, like they can't like show their forearms. A lot of the time
they can't flex the guns.
Shirts.
They can't do curls for the girls.
No, they can't. But it's not just women; it's men as well. There's sorts of veils that men wear as well, and the reason behind that is one, it's to kind of protect yourselves from wandering eyes, and by that I mean like attraction the opposite sex and things like that. So it's not just women, it's men as well. But also modesty kind of helps you in your focus in your religion and your deen, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of why God is asking you to do all those things.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. So yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to ask you because I remember we talked before, and you said that growing up here in the United States, your father kind of instilled at the same time that you were here, he instilled sort of some conservative values in you as well, and that you consider yourself a conservative. One thing that was really interesting that I wanted to ask you about is, you have a degree from the University of Oregon's journalism school. You have a master's from Columbia in journalism. One thing that really I remember just as something that really stood out to me in the past few years that was a big news story was the Charlie Hebdo massacre, where jihadists, radical jihadists, infiltrated the office in Paris that was operated by the magazine there that drew pictures of Muhammad in derogatory fashion. So you, I believe when we spoke before, said that that although you didn't think it was right, that you also didn't think that the Charlie Hebdo journalists or satirists should have the right to draw Muhammad. Is that still your position?
Yes.
Now, why is that?
In our previous conversation, we just talked about how, as Muslims, right, we love our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than we love our own mother, right? The concept of the love that we have for, our prophets and our Lord, it's part of what our religion teaches us, right? And the reason behind us not knowing what our prophet looks like is that we as Muslims, right, we don't want to associate a picture of our prophet, because we don't want, and it goes behind why we don't know what Allah looks like, what our Lord looks like, right? Similar to Christianity, we don't want to, praise like that photo of, Jesus, right? Christians are, have a lot of photos of what Jesus looks like, Jesus on the cross, things like that, right? So why is it okay for someone, and I think it also comes with, as journalists, we kind of have to learn about the lines of courtesy and, what our personal beliefs are, but also, what kind of like the backlash will be and what we report on, right? Though I believe free choice is okay, as journalists and things like that, but I also think kind of respecting, a religious group of over 2 billion Muslims around the world, right? And trying to like upset, such a large amount of, people and civilians, people who you live in your society with, because you're drawing a picture of their prophet is, and then they're not drawing it in a way that's like,
Right, but there's the case of being courteous and being respectful, but then there's also the case of the satirist's right to do whatever they want in terms of making fun of something. So it seems to be that, like, if I gave you a magic wand and said you can make whatever law you want, and so law meaning if someone does draw a picture of Muhammad, it's against the law. They are actually, are going to pay legal consequences for it. You
Yeah, what kind of punishment would you? So just add to that, what kind of punishment also would you want for someone to break that law?
What would the punishment for what be?
For drawing Muhammad.
For drawing a picture.
Yes.
I think here's. I think the only way kind of to like answer this question, right? You put it in this context. So if I'm a satirist now, right, and I'm a racist, and I want to use the word nigger and draw a picture of a black man being hung, and I want to write a few funny things about it and then put it out there in my out on social media, right? It is my right. I'm not disagreeing on that part. Yes, it is their right. Is it racist? Yes, it is. So it's the fact that, whether you're trying to justify if they have the right to do it, they have the right to do it. But whether or not it's targeting, a religious group, that's exactly what it's doing. And it's going against a whole religious belief.
Okay, I know, I understand that. And I understand kind of the reason why they don't want to depict Muhammad. They were afraid of falling into the same kind of idolatry traps of worshiping symbols and forgetting about, the true meaning of the religion, which is to kind of submit to Allah. And I get all of that. But again, I think I'm now getting confused, because when the Charlie Hebdo thing came out, I was reading news stories online, and it was saying that these 12 cartoonists were massacred. I mean, just murdered straight up by these Muslims in Paris. And these news outlets, some of them wouldn't even show the picture of Muhammad that caused the controversy. So I was like reading a news story, and the very center.
Which news outlets are you talking about?
There were multiple. I can't remember which ones exactly they were, but I'm talking about like big time American news outlets they wouldn't post the photos, or they would put like a black like censorship thing over it that say like warning, some viewers may find this disturbing, and then you click on it and then you can see the photos of Muhammad. So basically so we started off the conversation. I asked, do you think that they should have the right to do this? And you said no. And then, but now when you're explaining it, it sounds like you're saying they should have the right. and that but it just happens to be offensive.
Well, I think in the context of my personal belief, I personally, I don't think they should have the right to do that because it's so offensive, right?
Right. So I'm giving
But
you.
if
So if we're in
the
the magical scenario where I give you the magic wand and you can make the law, you would say that people shouldn't or should be able to draw Muhammad.
they shouldn't.
Should
It
not.
goes against my religious beliefs. How can I personally say it's okay
But if
when it
I
goes against my beliefs?
if I
Right.
don't like the NFL because I think it's bad that people make a living getting brain damage, and it's offensive to me. Do I still think that it should be that they shouldn't have the right to go out and play if they want to and they understand the dangers? So it seems to me a slippery slope of making things illegal because it offends you. What would you say to that?
Well, the question is personally what my beliefs are towards that, right? That was the question. It wasn't whether or not, is it okay for them to do that? That wasn't the question. It was my personal belief. My personal belief is it goes against my actual beliefs. And one, it goes against my personal belief, but two, it's also, completely targeting my religion and my prophet. And though it may not seem it, but it's actually in the worst way. You know what I mean? The worst way possible.
All right, let me.
It may not seem it.
Let me flip
but
it.
It is.
Let me flip it then. Okay, so say I start my own religion. So I believe personally that I've got a revelation from God and that I am beginning my own sect of Christianity or whatever it is, and and the one of the core tenets of my new religion is saying that no one should wear a hijab ever. And then so at that point someone wearing hijab in my presence would be offensive to me and would be against my religion. So should the people wearing hijab around me be forced to take it off because it offends my religion? Or is wearing the hijab their right because it's them expressing themselves and it has nothing to do with me telling them what to do?
I think that the way you're understanding me and kind of what I'm comprehending is kind of clashing. Yeah. Whether or not they're allowed to do this, and as a journalist, we're allowed to report on anything we personally believe, right? We're allowed to put it on that sphere. But once it's out there, it's out there. That's what I want you to understand. So whether or not I agree with the fact that, Charlie Hebdo went out and, drew satire pictures of my prophet, right? Whether or not I agree with that, it's out there. But as a journalist, right, there's always backlash to, our stories and what we put out there on these, social platforms. That's what I want you to understand, you and Tommy to understand in this. I mean that, as journalists, one, we choose what we do. We choose what we report on, right? And two, it's our own personal choice. And two, as a journalist, it's also, the way we do it, right? I expect something from, a writer in the New York Times. I expect it to be a certain way. However, compared to, say, a local newspaper here in Kenya, I expect things to be, the standard is much lower, right? The standard is much lower compared to the Times. So, from a satirist, though I expect satire, some of what they put out there could be offensive to their audience. And in this case, it is completely offensive to an entire religious group. In a way, it's actually targeting them. And I don't think that you guys see it that way. And that's kind of where we're clashing. Whether or not they're allowed to do it, they can do whatever they want. Whether or not I believe they're allowed to do it, that's my belief, that's my choice.
Yeah, it seems like though whenever the beliefs come from a religion, then everyone has to kind of back off. Like I mean, there for example, there are people out there that deny the Holocaust ever happening. Like that's their beliefs, but we don't. But it's perfectly okay to refute those people, and but when it comes to a religious to be belief, then it's like we have to just accept certain things. And I think that's what Michael was getting at with like, okay, all of a sudden, if I start my own religion that says this, then you have to respect his beliefs. It just seems like that's kind of why originally I was asking you about like, is it the religion or is it your belief in God that attracts you to it? And it seems like the community, the culture, um, is almost a more powerful than the theocracy part. That's interesting.
I think that like compared to other Muslims, right? Um, where I stand in my like faith is much more conservative than perhaps what you see in the societal standards, and that's partly because of my upbringing. And Michael and I talked about this in our previous conversation. It's the fact that one, I'm an immigrant. I come from a society Kenya is almost 90 to 95% Catholic, but still a very religious country, right? The kind of where society stands for, modesty and women and things like that are almost so similar to what my religion dictates for Christians here in Kenya. So here, where my religion and where my culture stand are very, very similar to what the societal standards are, right? But in America, things are so much different. And because I kind of had the best of both worlds and was born here, but also, my parents ingrained, my culture, my heritage, and my religion in my upbringing. My beliefs differ from an ordinary Muslim born and raised in America. And so when we talk about, like my choice in wearing my hijab and stuff, I do it because I do it because God has asked me to do it, but I also do it because I choose to do it. And I mean that in the sense that religion in this society, we talk about free choice, and people taking bits and pieces of religion, right, what they like, what they don't like, and then choosing to follow one or the other, right? Me as a Muslim, I almost strictly follow what my religion says, quite strictly. And that's partly because of my upbringing. It's because my parents are so religious. It's also because my siblings are very religious. But it's also because of, life experience that I've had that I choose to follow my religion in this way. I hope that makes sense, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that might be a good place. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I know you it's pretty late in Kenya right now, so...
yeah, can I just actually say one more thing?
Yeah. I didn't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I just I think in talking about Charlie Hebdo, I didn't mention that one though I may have my personal beliefs may differ from free choice of satires and things like that. My religion does not and never condones killing those innocent people at Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah.
And the fact that that was kind of like the backlash to that is sad, and it's one of those things that's what people think my religion is, or what my religion condones, right? They think it's this violent entity when it isn't. It's very few people, right? A very small percentage of 2 billion Muslims, right? So let's say 0.001% of my religion now, right? Because in this society, say a couple 100,000 Muslims, right, associate themselves with terror organizations compared to 2 billion. So now people take such a small amount and say that is what my religion is, and that's what my religion is condoning, and that isn't necessarily the case. People aren't very willing to have conversations like this,
Yeah. Well, I think
about my religion and things like that, and kind of learning, because it goes both ways. Like, I learn just as much from you and Tommy here about what you think society stands, and I can correct you and you can correct me and things like that.
Yeah.
But people nowadays, because they fear so much of the unknown, they're not willing to have these conversations.
Yeah, totally. And I think probably why this is such a big deal now, and why it's such a clash of cultures. You're seeing, the rise of Donald Trump. You're seeing the rise of Marine Le Pen in France, who wants to cut off the borders and things like that. Because with the headbow thing, like, there's a percentage of Muslims in the world. I've heard that it's more like 1.4, 1.5 billion than 2 billion, but maybe you're right, it's 2 billion. So there's like a certain percentage of Muslims in the world where, given the opportunity, they would have also waged war on these cartoonists. That's probably a very small percentage. But then you have another percentage of people that grows, and that percentage of people believes that the killings were justified. And then you have another percentage of people on top of that, where, although they don't believe the killings were justified, that you don't think that they should have drawn the cartoons in the first place. And so as you like get like more moderate, it's still these issues that many Muslims in the world take the viewpoint on, that is sort of clashing with some Western culture of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And maybe that's why we're starting to see this sort of it's like an idea battle. In some cases, like we've seen in London, like we've seen in Sweden, like we're seeing terrorist attacks all across Europe right now. It's also a physical battle, but it's mostly this battle of ideas that I think people are trying to consolidate, East versus West, and the way that some of these value systems are just different. And so I think that's really interesting to get your viewpoint, and interesting to understand where you're coming from, because I think a lot of people are confused by that. And like, even if you say, like, I don't know, I'll be really generous, and because the percentages are a lot higher than this, but if I said 5% of Muslims believe that the killings in Headbow were justified, 5% is still, if you took 5% of 2 billion, that's still tens of millions of people.
20 million.
Yeah. So it's just I think it's getting to a point where we're trying to figure out how to move forward in a world that's becoming increasingly global, and that's the challenge we face.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also it's the fact that whether it be Muslim or non-Muslim, the clash between East and West, it's the fact that people don't necessarily educate themselves to an extent. So it's like they will take a context of the religion, misinterpret it, and put their beliefs now and try and justify, okay, say Charlie Hebdo, those killings were justified. They'll have that personal belief where, as a Muslim, we're not God, right? It's not our job to go and personally do God's job. So it's not our job to go out and kill other people, when time comes.
Wait, so you're saying that that's God's job?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's not our, it's not our job. What I mean by God's job, I mean, is to make judgments of, like, for example, who can live, who can die, things like that. That's what I mean. Right. I don't mean personally go out and kill people. Right. I just meant it in the context of, Muslims going out and killing innocent people, right? And trying to justify that that's okay. it's not okay, right? And so that's partly because, in trying to justify those killings are okay, that's partly because, it's on both levels. Whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, there's ignorance on both levels, right? And they don't educate themselves, and a lot of the sad part is, say that 5% of those Muslims, right, aren't even fully practicing Muslims, right? So if you're not a fully practicing Muslim, you don't follow your religion exactly how it's dictated, who are you to go take a small context of, the Holy Quran and try and justify something like that? If you really were to know your religion, you would know your religion doesn't condone killing innocent people, right? So I think it's ignorance and the lack of education on both levels. And if people were willing to have all of these conversations and learn from one another rather than getting upset and physically and verbally attacking one another, then our society would thrive.
Awesome, Fahmo. It's always so good seeing you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no worries. So nice to see you, Tommy.
Yeah.
Yes, nice meeting you.
Get some
All right,
sleep. Daniel.
Thanks for.
Pardon?
Tommy, what'd you say?
Oh, I just said have a good night.
This is the joys of trying to have a podcast with 3 people in 3 different places on the globe.
Yeah.
Fahmo, thanks so much for coming on. Let's talk again soon.
No worries, guys.
All right?
I'll see you
All right.
guys.
All right. Talk
Have
to
a
you
good
later.
day.
We will.
Yeah.
Have a good sleep.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.